1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You good?
Yep.
Fabulous. Is the mic all twisted up, or is it the... Well, I did fucked up. Maybe because I put it down on the floor. Maybe that was a mistake.
That's fine. Look, we're older than I did that, really. Is it hotter than death in here?
No, it's fine.
It's hotter than death. Cool. I'll fall asleep though. And we're rolling.
All right.
If you could just start off by telling us your first and last name and saying what you do.
I'm Dave Goldberg, and I'm the creative director at BNN TV.
Okay. And on the day of the 11th.
Should I do an alternate, by the way? Like, created bnntv.com? Now that I probably should do that, shouldn't I?
Go for it. Try it.
I'm Dave Goldberg, and I'm the creative director for bnntv.com.
Okay. The day of September 11th, BNN sort of switched gears. What happened on that day?
When I came in on the morning of September 11th, I was expecting that we were going to start production on a new series, a new lighthearted comedy series. And by about 9:15 that morning, it became totally apparent that that wasn't going to happen. And we made a decision right then and there. It's weird because I think a lot of us felt, having somewhat of a journalistic background, some of us did, some of us didn't, but with all the documentaries we've done before, it rang in, I think, a bunch of our heads that we should probably be covering this. And then part of us were also thinking we should probably get the hell home and see that our families are okay, and just, you know, who knew? We might have to run for our lives. I mean, we were right near the Empire State Building. We had no idea what was going on. But a lot of us felt that this was a chance to actually cover something that was happening, like, you know, no more than 50 blocks away from us, and something that we really had to see and that we can share with other people. So we had no idea what we were going to do with all this material and all this tape, and we had no idea if we were going to get anything at all, but we knew we had to at least try. So what was weird, what changed that day, is that everybody took out a camera that works here, from our CFO to, let's start that again. Pretty much everyone who works here took a camera out at some point that day. Even our CFO was sent down to St. Vincent's Hospital to kind of cover what was happening there. They were expecting casualties to come in, and he all of a sudden became a journalist. And basically everyone in the building was outside shooting this event because there was really nothing else to do.
And what did you do on that day?
During the day, my role was really to play kind of part of my role that day was really to act as part news director, part producer back here at BNN while everyone was out shooting. And along with Steve Rosenbaum, I was, you know, keeping tabs on all the different crews out there, checking in every hour, half hour, as often as we could, to see that, one, everyone who was shooting was okay and that they were getting something on tape, or if they needed some direction, or if they were freaking out, to at least calm them down, or to inspire them to go shoot more and try another location, or try to work their way towards ground zero. Excuse me. So most of my role that day was really just to kind of sit back, strategize about which areas we could cover, and to also keep tabs on the news and to figure out where, you know, victims were being taken, to listen in to see if there were any other attacks that were going to be sprouting up, what other bomb threats there were, and to figure out where we can position our people to make sure that we were getting the best story.
And while you were doing that, did you ever feel like maybe I should call the team back in from this location? Maybe this location isn't safe. Maybe, they should go to a different location.
Oh, I totally freaked out because we sent the crews out, I think by 10:30 that morning, they were actually all out the door and heading towards the Trade Center. And at that point, the buildings were still standing. And not long after everyone left, that's when the buildings started to come down. And that's when I really got scared because I thought for a second, I had no idea where, Laurie and Terry might be. I knew they were trying to get down to ground zero. I was just hoping that no one was too close to where the buildings collapsed. And yeah, it rang through my head a lot. I mean, I would talk to people from the field who would say, I don't want to be here, I'm hot, I'm tired, I'm scared, I don't know what I'm doing. And in one or two cases, I would say, well, then just come back, after a while, if you're not getting anything anymore. And then there were people who were saying to me, they were tired and scared and didn't know what to do, but they were still willing to keep pushing on. So I just kind of tried to figure out ways for them to, we had a map of New York City and I was looking at the different cross streets and different ways to get around and getting reports from other people who were calling and saying what was closed off, what they thought was open, what successes they had, and giving them ideas about where they can try to move in.
So as you're applying this strategy, do you ever feel like, does a journalist in you ever come out, did a part of you ever say, I just want to go out and get it?
It's weird. I've never really thought of myself as a journalist. I didn't go to journalism school. I mean, I've made documentaries here before, and I've done segments in news before. But I never really thought of myself as a reporter or a journalist. But I do have this strange bug wherever there's a shooting or an accident or something that's going on in the city, and I'm around, I always tend to flock towards it because I want to see what's happening. In this case, I was a little bummed out that I was staying back here. Part of me wanted to go out there, one, for my own curiosity, and two, because I had sent everybody else out there. I felt I should be doing that with them. And it actually wasn't until late that evening that I got that chance to go check it out myself. I got a call from a former intern here who said he just volunteered with the Red Cross. And this is about 10:30 at night. He called up saying, I'm with the Red Cross. I have access into ground zero, because at this point the cops and the National Guard had closed everything off and nobody was getting in and people's cameras were being taken away and it was an ugly scene. And he said, I can get you in there, or at least if you give me a camera, I can definitely get pictures of ground zero. And I headed down there at about 11:30 that night with a camera in my hand, ready to meet him somewhere in Tribeca. And I waited on the street corner for about 15, 20, 30 minutes. He never showed up, just totally disappeared. He had been spotted about 10 minutes before I got there, never showed up. And for some really wacky, weird reason, and this is also, my wife is at home with friends, she's all freaked out. She was working downtown. She didn't get home till about 9 o'clock that night. She was, walking uptown, trying to find her way back. And I knew she wanted me home, but something in me made me keep walking downtown. When he didn't show up to pick up the camera, I decided I was gonna go see for myself, one, if I can find him, and two, if I can just kind of see what's going on downtown since I haven't been there yet. And I met up with a couple of MTA iron workers who were going down to relieve another crew. And this is getting to be closer to midnight. And I just started walking with them. And I stripped the microphone off the camera. I stripped it down to its barest bone, so it almost looked like a little, touristy kind of thing. And I started walking with these iron workers and literally just walked with them, in between them, past cops, past all this military security, and within about 10 minutes found myself right in the middle of ground zero. And it was really weird because I wasn't interviewing these guys. I started to talk to them, but they didn't have much to say. They didn't even know what they were going there for. They just knew they had to relieve the workers that were there now. And I didn't have a mask, I didn't have goggles, I didn't have a hat, I didn't have anything because I had no intention of actually going to the site. So I'm walking through there with my camera, up to my ankles in ash and dust and just crap, and I had no idea what was beneath my feet. And spent a good 2.5, 3 hours just slowly walking through these streets that I knew pretty well because I'd spent a lot of time in Lower Manhattan. I have friends who work down there, who work in Tribeca, just a few blocks away from where I was. And it was wild. I mean, I saw Fortunately, I didn't see any bodies or anything gruesome, but I saw, total World War III nuclear holocaust devastation. It was blown out buildings, blown out windows, blown out cars, and all these like firemen and emergency service workers and policemen and doctors and a couple of priests just like standing around, not even really doing anything, just kind of zoning out. I mean, there were guys putting out fires still, and I was able to see them pouring water on the rubble that was like, it seemed like 10, 15 stories high. It was wild. But it was more just about seeing these people completely exhausted, dejected, freaked out by what had happened.
Oh, I think your mic's cutting in and out.
1, 2, 3. This seems fine.
Battery's flashing.
So do you always hear Lori's conversations in phone? So loud.
She is loud. Yeah. She was like, you don't realize it until like she starts like really talking. Yeah. She was like, we were at Ironworkers.
You want me to go back to how I got down there and everything, or?
No, that part was fine. It was
no, the last thing I was talking about was just riffing, just what I saw that night. So when I got down there, I had to be careful of a couple of things. One was that the place was flooded with cops and firefighters. Well, let me still do two different things. When I got down there, the first thing I saw was that I was like, my ankles were in like what seemed like a foot of ash, and it was exactly like, it reminded me almost of like the end of like, Planet of the Apes or something, where it was Armageddon. You knew the city had been destroyed, like it had been hit by a nuclear bomb. I mean, everything was blown out. It was just so weird. It was like big rocks of debris and dust everywhere and flying through the wind, and I didn't have a mask, I didn't have goggles, so I had to like cover my face up. And did I fuck that up? Did you fix it? Okay. I had to cover my face up, with my hand or my shirt or whatever I could. Stuff was flying in my eyes. And I just looked around and I saw that it was all firefighters and EMS workers and cops and doctors and other rescue workers. Just most of them were just kind of standing around. I mean, it was really, at that point, really brightly lit, because they, I guess, really quickly got lights onto the scene so they can start searching for bodies and start putting out the fires. But everyone was kind of just like standing around like zombies. Like they were either exhausted because they had been there since 9 o'clock in the morning and now it was like 12:30 at night, or they were just so freaked out. And that's pretty much how I felt. I mean, I was just kind of freaked out because I had no idea how bad it was. I mean, I remember before I even hit exactly ground zero, I was passing Chambers Street in Tribeca, a block I know really well. And that's where I felt like the line was, where it was almost like a straight line of dust, and all of a sudden you crossed over into another world. And I saw this restaurant that I had gone to a bunch of times, and its windows were blown out. And as I got deeper in, I saw more and more cars that were smashed to bits, and their windshields totally gone, and their ceilings or their roofs just completely dented in and caved in. And it was just totally freaky because it was really quiet, even though it seemed like hundreds of people down there, but nobody was talking. And I had my camera and I'm shooting all of this, and I'm shooting, just the faces of like firefighters just looking exhausted and dejected, and I'm shooting, some firefighters like putting out the fire on what seemed like 10, 14 stories of rubble that was still smoldering and burning, and shooting also all of like the weird debris, like that classic shot of the last remaining part of the tower that was all jaggy sticking up. It was scarily beautiful too. It was really wild. But nobody was saying a word. And, part of me is, being the journalist or the TV producer that I that I am, I thought I should be talking to these people and asking them the questions and finding out, what they were doing, what's going on, tell me about the scene. And I never approached a single person. Part of it was because I was in shock, part of it was because they were in shock, and it just didn't seem appropriate. It didn't seem like there needed to be any questions at that point, all those would be answered later on. I lost my train of thought though, or where I was going with this.
Now, when you say freaky, or you were freaked out, is that really the moment when you realized that it was real? I mean, because everyone has a different moment when, it went from watching news footage, it went from, this is a disaster, New York has been attacked, our way of life will somehow be compromised. Was that the moment for you?
I had a couple of moments that day. The first real moment where I felt the sadness and any kind of pain was literally at like 8:50 that morning. I had just gotten off the subway and I was in a photo store and dropping off some film, and I saw the owner of the store running down the stairs it was like this loft, and he's like, "A plane just hit the World Trade Center, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." And he was like gloating about it. It was weird. He was like goofing on it like it was a freak thing and it was wild. You should check this out. And already my stomach kind of sank because I just figured, holy shit, that means, hundreds if not thousands of people are dead. Just like that, And I don't think anyone is figuring that out. Or at least these guys weren't at that moment. And then I'm walking down 28th Street towards the office, and I saw all these construction workers also running into a hardware store where there's a TV, jumping up and down about it. A plane. And then I walk over to Fifth Avenue where our building is, and I look down the street and I see everyone just staring at the smoldering, building. And that's really when it hit me also. It was just like, oh man, this is really bad. And then a few minutes later, the second plane hit. And that's when I knew that nothing would ever be the same in the city. At least, for a certain period of time that we would always be on edge. And being out a little bit in the street that afternoon, just being on Fifth Avenue, seeing people walk down like zombies towards the rubble. It was weird. They were walking towards the disaster. It was like a science fiction movie out of the 50s. They're all like looking up and I'm like, why are you walking down there? They're like, I don't know. I just got to see it. And that's when it got really, really scary for me. That and the fact that we knew there were still planes up there potentially. But as far as really being in the middle of it and absorbing it and seeing how just horrible it really was exactly that moment that I crossed over Chambers Street and I saw things familiar to me completely gone, completely blown away, completely destroyed. And being able to smell it and touch it and really seeing the faces on the people that had to deal with it, that was the worst part. So that's why at that moment I was able to really stand back and just absorb what was really going on. And I was kind of left speechless, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I don't think anyone wanted to talk to me either. And it was weird because I'm down there with a camera. It's obvious I'm shooting this stuff. And I had kind of had to also have my wits about me and know that what I was doing was, one, dangerous, and two, illegal. And that I had to make sure that I wasn't going to get arrested or harassed by cops. So every time I saw some cops, I would kind of just casually walk in a different direction. It was also points where, even though part of it was really bright and lit up, there were really still just dark alleys. So I'm walking down these really creepy dark alleys in New York, which you would never do on a normal day. But I knew that there was no one there that could hurt me or do anything, except maybe the cops who would tell me to get the hell out. And so it was kind of like this, the cat and mouse thing. I saw them looking at me, I had to go a different way. But the weird thing is, when you're on the perimeter as a journalist or a photographer or just a curious, New Yorker who wants to see what's going on, the cops and the National Guard would throw you out in a second. They were very diligent about it. But at Ground Zero, that night, the first night amidst all the rubble and wreckage, they didn't care because they were too freaked out. I mean, I saw cops and firefighters look at me for a second and it was just like, they didn't want to bother because they just had other things on their minds,
And how long did you stay down there, approximately?
I'm bad with time, but I think I was probably, I remember getting in there around midnight or so and not getting home until about 3:30, 4 in the morning. So I probably spent a good 2.5 hours. The other thing was I had to basically walk most of the way from Battery Park, where I was filming, up to about, I think I ended up walking almost to 42nd Street and then finally being able to get a subway to go home.
And while you were walking around for those 2 hours, were you by yourself or were you with someone else?
It's weird, most of it I was by myself. I actually walked down there with Lucia Davis, another one of our video journalists who shot down there that night. And she also was walking ahead with some iron workers. That's how we both got in. She was much more prepared. She had goggles, she had the hat, she had the mask, the whole thing. And we walked in for a little bit together and then we split up because I guess we both just, I don't think it was even a conscious decision. I think we both went our separate ways because we both saw things that were shocking to us that we wanted to pursue. And she was looking to do more interview, more talk to people, talk to the ironworkers, see if she could talk to cops. And we met up again, we found each other later on the streets, and that felt good actually to see a familiar person, even though I'd only met her that day, to see a familiar face and know that I wasn't alone in the situation. And then I remember, I guess just before I left, I finally got, busted by a cop. And he wasn't going to arrest me, he just said, "You should get the hell out of here." And it wasn't because I was, breaking any laws or causing trouble or even in his way. He just said, look up. And he showed me like debris that was still falling from tops of buildings. And he goes, you're not wearing a helmet, you're going to get killed or you might get hurt. Just don't be stupid. What's more important, your life or a piece of videotape? And that was a good moment of perspective for me too. So I actually did. I backtracked out of there. And I mean, I still had to walk a good, 5 or 10 blocks out of ground zero where there was still total devastation. So I still got a lot more, great moments of firefighters putting out the flames or just bowing their heads, not knowing what to do, knowing they had lost, hundreds of their friends.
When you say that you had to walk 5 or 6 blocks, let's say that, people in Middle America don't understand, ground zero. They hear the word and they just think the towers. How big was that area that you were in?
I can't tell you how big it was. I mean, I know the area well because I've spent plenty of time down there just growing up, and even in the last, 5 years, spending time in Battery Park or at the World Trade Center. I've even shot on the World Trade Center. I've been to the top of the World Trade Center shooting from, the very top roof, not even the observation deck, but where you're not supposed to be because I was working on a story from there. And I still can't tell you, I could tell you what it's like from way up. You're higher than some airplanes and helicopters. You're higher than, I remember seeing the MetLife blimp pass below my feet, and that was wild. But in terms of that whole area, I have no idea. So I'm sorry, I can't give you perspective on like what.
You have no idea because it was small, or you have no idea because it was big?
I have no idea how big or small that area is because when I would be down there in its normal state, I wouldn't pay attention to that stuff. And that night, everything was destroyed. So it was just a big, massive, blocks upon blocks, maybe half a mile's worth of just rubble. I think 20 blocks is about a mile, and I probably, walked about 10 blocks in that area. And it was just gone.
And then you go home that night.
Well, so when I'm walking out, at that point, Lucia and I both got kind of busted together at the same time. We started walking out together. And she stopped for a second and started filming, and I think she kind of walked back in. I just kept walking. I was done. I just wanted to go home. I knew I had, a lot of amazing footage. I had seen enough. I got my own, whether it's a thrill or whether it's just a taste of what happened that day. So I could see for myself what went on. And as I'm walking out, I actually ran into a couple of guys. I ran into a guy who was a chaplain I knew he was a chaplain. He was like a young guy, like in his 30s, tall, because it said, his little name tag, it said something like, Mike Chaplain, who was very talkative and had been down there all day, and he and I just started rapping. I didn't have my camera on him, I was just holding it, and he was telling me about, having to say last rites over a bunch of people that they were there and how hard it was. He'd been there since 9 in the morning, and he was still kind of like a priest in training, and he was great. And ahead of us, about maybe 5 or 10 feet, was 2 priests, I guess, who they had been working with all day. And they were like, in the full collar regalia. And so they're walking like 10 feet ahead of us, and they hear me talking to the chaplain. And after a while, and then I became the journalist guy again, instead of just being his friend. And I said, hey, would you mind if I just turn the camera and ask you some questions? And he looked at me and he goes, I'm really not comfortable talking about this stuff on camera, but I'm happy to talk to you, just to talk to you. One of the priests that was ahead of us turned around and looked at me, and he goes, I don't want to say a goddamn word to you. I'm sick of you people. As a matter of fact, I'm so sick right now, I want to throw up all over you, so get the hell away from me. A priest using terms like, goddamn and hell. And it was pretty wild. And he was really violent and angry, and I hadn't even been talking to him, so we had no discourse, me and this guy. But he still was ready to go after me because I represented something horrible. I represented the media that needed to, treat this as this exploitive, let's look at the bodies, let's talk about the pain and the suffering kind of thing. And that really wasn't my intention at all. I mean, I figured, that's not how I felt when I was shooting down there. Maybe when I asked the chaplain to talk to me, because he had such emotional and incredible things to say, I guess I did cross the line because I wanted to hear from someone who had been down there and who experienced it to kind of tell the story. But the guy who actually turned around and turned violent, I guess the chaplain apologized for him, saying, he's a hostile priest, and he had a really horrible day and saw a lot of people jumping out of windows, from 100 stories up, and it was just bad news.
When you look back at that situation, did you make the wrong decision, or?
The wrong decision about asking the chaplain? Maybe. There was no need to. Look, I don't know the answer to that one. I guess, yeah, if I had gotten him to talk to me on camera and give me this incredible, heartfelt perspective, yeah, I'm sure we would have used it, and I'm sure it would have been great television, and I'm sure it would have been something that people would have found, interesting and fascinating. It's a perspective other than hearing what the firefighters and the police went through. It was someone who had to sit there and console the firefighters and the policemen and the EMS workers and the victims. And I don't wish I got it. In a way, I could care less. I did feel a little bad because I completely understand why that guy snapped. Totally get it, And honestly, I feel like I need to apologize, but I totally get what triggered in him the need to kind of explode at that moment. I mean, it's like the worst thing that's ever happened in New York City, when he was right in the middle of it and saw horrible things. So, you got to let it out on somebody. So why not the Jew?
So you end up going home that night, and then your wife turns to you and says you're crazy.
No. Well, it's weird. My wife, I was really happy. My wife works on Houston and Hudson Street, which is very close to Ground Zero. I mean, and she was totally freaked out. And we were on the phone constantly from 9 in the morning, talking back and forth between, that was the other thing I was doing that day. Is there a problem? Or? The other thing I was doing that day, aside from, helping Steve coordinate the crews and hearing what's coming in, was also talking to my wife, who works all the way downtown. And, we were giving each other updates about what was going on. She really wanted me to just leave and go home. And I said to her, I can't, I need to cover this. I was more worried about her because she was right down there, But none of the people in her building were leaving. They were all sitting there watching TV, trying to figure out what to do. And all I kept saying to her was, make sure that you leave with somebody. Don't go home alone. Don't walk towards the east side. We live on the Upper East Side, which is the opposite direction from where her office is. And I said to her, don't walk by the UN. because there was no subways, no buses. New York City was in lockdown. It was a whole crazy scene. But fortunately, she had some friends who worked, maybe a mile or two away from her office on the west side. So I just asked her, like, as soon as she was leaving with people from work, to walk with them as far as she can, then meet up with her friends, and then go back to our house or go somewhere with them. And she did that. I even was in contact with her up until about just before I went into Ground Zero. I had been talking to her as often as I could from my cell phone, which was barely working either, but whenever I can get out, I would always call her to find out how she was. And I think the last time I talked to her before I saw her again was probably about like 1:30 in the morning. I was able to get a signal and she was still with friends, and that made me feel great. But when I came home at about 4 in the morning, she was totally zonked out of sleep. So even though I came in stinking, covered in ash, my whole body was just, drenched in the stuff. And, who knows what was in that. And my eyes were watering because they had so much crap that flew into them. I just jumped in the shower, got in bed next to her, told her everything was fine.
Now let's fast forward to, when was the bomb scare? Was that Thursday? That was Thursday, right? Grand Central?
We got attacked on Tuesday, right? Mm-hmm. And 2 days later, 2 days later, we went out. I'm trying to remember why we did this. So after the first 24-hour period, we had already started. The next morning, we were already editing, footage. We had a bunch of producers in the building. We had people from MSNBC over here, people from the BBC, people from CNN calling, people from CBS calling. Everybody wanted our footage. Everybody wanted to start working with it, and we had all these edit rooms going. It was craziness. And but the story wasn't even close to being over. I mean, at that point we thought it could be, 6,000, 10,000 dead. Nobody had any idea what was going on. So all that day, the next day, Wednesday, I remember being here at BNN, cutting tape, looking through tape, finding other stories, figuring out what the fallout was, still sending crews out to go cover the hospitals, cover the morgues, cover the cops, anything we can get. You still at that point couldn't even give real direction about stories. It was more just go out in the streets, you're going to find something, because New York was still in military lockdown. The place was totally shut off. Nobody came to work in the city that day except for us, the TV people. And I know the next day, on Thursday, I went out with a camera to go find more stories. And it was the same thing, just go out there and see what's there. And I remember being in the truck with Rashid Daniel, and getting a call from one of our senior producers that there was a bomb scare at Grand Central and we should go there. And I thought to myself, well, why do I want to do that? That's crazy, Like I said earlier, I was always one to run to scenes when there was a disaster. But after what I saw at the World Trade Center that night, I kind of made a conscious decision right then and there that the next time I hear sirens, the next time there's some kind of like bomb scare, some crazy, crazy stuff happening, I'm going to run the other way because I'm really happy the way my life is going right now, so I don't need to be in that kind of danger. So when we got the call to go check out the bomb scare, I thought it was a little nuts, but I also knew that it was one of about 100 bomb scares going on in the city that day, none of which turned into anything. But literally, there were like 100 bombs. There was even one in Barney's, I heard, And the funny thing is, as we go to Grand Central, everyone's thrown out of Grand Central. The cops are all over the place, but Rashid and I just walked right in. They let us walk right in, and there was nothing going on. It was just like another crazy moment in New York, history that day. I remember when we got back, seeing, our senior producers and them saying to us, well, at first we weren't going to send you to Grand Central, but then when we heard it was a real scare, we thought it was important you should go, And that definitely altered my perspective on whether or not it's really worth covering it or not. I mean, what's the point of covering a bomb scare? Because if there's no scare, if it's not true, then there's nothing to report, other than the fact that there was a bomb scare, which we could do in a line of text, if it does blow up, why the hell do you want to be there? And really, after the 11th, I completely changed my attitude about the kind of things that I think are worth covering. There are some people that still want to do that, and that's great that they will, and they'll be there to cover those things. But it really changed my feeling about what I'd want to be in the middle of in a given situation.
And then, before we even got back, we headed over to the armory. Explain what that scene is like. Let me check how much tape we got. All right, we're good.
Take a sip. So after the Grand Central bomb scare, Rashid and I headed over to the Armory, which was on 26th Street and Lexington Avenue, just a couple of blocks from our office. And it was like total pandemonium. I mean, there were, just these huge military vehicles and Red Cross trucks and every single media crew with their satellite trucks, and it was a whole nutty scene. And the reason was, that was the first time, this is 2 days after the attack, that people who lost somebody in the towers or in Lower Manhattan that day could come and make a claim, or at least just report their, brother, sister, wife, husband, child missing. And it was actually really sad. It was like this big media event, and everyone was standing outside, victims' families, and media, and cops, and military guys, for this big crazy event. And it was heartbreaking, because all along the walls of that block, on lampposts, on phone booths, wherever they could put it, was a picture of the person that was missing. And at that point, it was interesting, because it was already 2 days later. I mean, you saw what happened to the towers, and all these people were still hopeful that their loved ones were alive. I mean, we interviewed maybe 15, 20 people that day, and all of them were wearing, aside from the posters and flyers they put up, they were all wearing these like cardboard cutout with a photo of their, of their family member, with the person's phone number and name and what they were wearing that day and who they worked for or what floor they worked on, and just saying, any information, please let us know. And everybody was like, nobody was even really crying. They were all like optimistic and hopeful that, these people were still alive. And that was amazing. I mean, it actually probably made it easier to digest what we were doing, part of me felt creepy interviewing these people, because I'm asking you about someone that's very likely dead, and here you are talking about it. But they were doing it because they wanted the media coverage. They were hoping that, that their cousin was, in a hospital somewhere, or roaming the streets for getting like an amnesiac, and that you would see them on TV and say, oh my God, that's your brother, that's your sister. And I think, in the back of my mind, I knew that it was just unlikely that they were going to find anybody, So that kind of sucked. But you wanted to be positive with it. It was weird. I didn't feel like I was being a journalist or being a reporter at that time. I felt like I was just being, either a friend or a person just to talk to and give them a second of hope,
And then in the back of your mind, I mean, for those of us that were removed from the death and removed from, having something specific that they were searching for, in the back of your mind, in the back of my mind, we're sort of thinking, we think they're missing, but we're sort of 80-90% sure that they may have passed on. While you're thinking that, and while you're doing this interview, is there any interview that really stands out in your head where you just wanted to either hug the person, or you just either wanted to say it'll be okay, or because I remember during that time it was even really hard to end interviews, because it was like you talk to them, and then what do you say? Have a good day,
I never, felt like I wanted to reach out and hug somebody. I didn't feel that way. I almost felt bad about what I was doing. I felt disingenuous. I almost felt the way that priest 2 nights before wanted me to feel. I felt that I can't offer these people hope. You know, what can I do? I mean, yeah, we'll put this on television. You know, maybe it'll be on tonight, maybe it'll be on a year from now. It's, you know, but I never felt that what I was doing was going to make a difference for them at that point, except that they were having a chance to at least feel a little bit better, knowing that everyone in the world cared, and everyone in the world wanted to know, and everyone in the world wanted to help. But I felt a little bit disingenuous too, because I knew that there was really nothing that anyone can do.
And standing amongst all that, I mean, did you feel helpless almost?
I never felt helpless. I felt like I was doing them somewhat of a service to make them feel better, but I knew that there was nothing I could do to actually, you know, help them bring back that person. So it wasn't so much a feeling of helplessness, it was more of a feeling of like, what good is going to be coming of this? And I'm trying to remember if there was any one person. I do remember, this goes back so far, I remember the first person I spotted wasn't even at the armory yet. They were actually leaving the armory, but I saw these two young women walking down the street wearing the posters on their necks, and it's the first time I had seen that. I had seen some of the posters, you know, along the streets, but I hadn't seen anyone actually wearing it yet, and this is like, you know, whatever, half a mile from the armory. So I jumped out of the car, and I just started chasing them down the street to find out. I jumped out of the car and started chasing them down the street to find out what was going on. And they had lost a brother who had worked, you know, on a high floor at the World Trade Center. And they had just kind of put his statistics in, his name, his ID, what he was wearing, any kind of marks. They'd already registered him with the armory and were now on their way back to, I think they were all at the Pierre Hotel or something, where there was a bunch of victims' families that were camped out just waiting for news. And then when Rashid and I finally found each other again, because it was total mayhem down there, we interviewed a lot of people, and it was all different like races and nationalities too. I mean, there were like African American couples, there was a lot of Asian people, I remember one girl who was looking for her brother also, and he had just been married like a couple of weeks before, and she was showing me their wedding photo of her brother and her sister-in-law. And that was probably, in a weird way, that was probably the most horrible thing to see, you know, because it was like a wedding photo taken not more than a couple of weeks before, you know. And he was gone. I was glad I didn't see the wife at that moment.
I remember that photo. I remember that it was like a garden wedding. And the shot was like really nice. I mean, it wasn't, you know, too overdone or anything like that. They just looked like they had general happiness. And anytime anyone asks me about like that week, I say that that's like the point where like it sort of became real for me. That like that's when like death became real, because I realized that like, you know, she's married. You know, there's so much at stake. There's a baby coming on the way. She was the reason why the wife wasn't there is because I think she was like 8 months or something like that pregnant.
Oh.
And then all of that just sort of hit me at once. You know, I was standing there shooting, and then I just looked at the picture and I did like a push in, and I think every time anyone asks me, I say that's the point that I realized that we had loss of life in New York, because I think before that, you know, like you were saying, there was so much just of the buildings falling constantly, and just of, you know, like the skeleton that remained, but there were never any really like bloody images that week. There was never, you know.
Well, it was interesting. There was no, the feeling of death hit me immediately. The feeling of death hit me the second I saw that first plane, you know, sitting atop, you know, Tower 1. Just, that's when I felt horrible right away. I had no idea what was coming. You know, I had no idea how much worse it was going to be. But at that moment, I was very, very sensitive to the fact that, and maybe it's my own like paranoia of flying and how horrible planes are in general, but at that moment I saw, that's all I could see, was how many people were dead when I saw that plane inside. And that night when I was walking all along the rubble, at that moment, I didn't feel death at all. I felt like the death of a city. I felt like the death of a culture. You know, I felt like, because everything was so blown out and so freaky, and the wind was whistling, and it was just creepy. It didn't feel like human death. It felt like the death of a city. And yeah, we were lucky in that, you know, we didn't have to see gruesome images of people hurt, or, you know, people dismembered, or just horrible stuff like that. Part of it's because so many people were just, you know, they evaporated basically, and the press was also kept out from getting those images, and I'm glad that we didn't have to see that, and we didn't have to show it, because it wasn't necessary. It was so shocking in and of itself that I don't think those images would have helped.
So during the week, a lot of people say that, you know, their mood went up and down, and, you know, sometimes they were scared, and sometimes, you know, there was a lot of adrenaline rushing in them. How do you feel like you reached your arc that week? Do you feel you sort of...
I'm really bad with time, but I know that week we were working, you know, anywhere from 24 to 36 hours straight with no sleep, nonstop, shooting more, editing more, covering more, getting it up on, you know, the networks, just, and I never had a time to like really absorb, you know, how horrible it was. I mean, I did feel terrible when I saw knowing all those people had died just from that first collision. But even when I was shooting that first night, I was still a little bit immune to, you know, the pain and the suffering and all those things that we were all going to go through. And I think by, you know, maybe a week after it, we still hadn't slept, we still hadn't taken a day off. I mean, you know, we were here Saturday, Sunday, Monday, nonstop. And I never had time to talk to my friends or my family or my wife. I barely saw her. I'd come home at 4 in the morning, I'd sleep for 2 hours, get up, go back in by 7, you know? And I think the exhaustion, the lack of communication with anyone that I loved or was close to, on top of having to sit and watch these images over and over and over again and just talk about, you know, what we were going to cover next, I never had a chance to kind of like mourn this or feel anything. I was just so involved in the work and on this such high adrenaline high for like 7 days straight that I don't think I actually really like broke down until about a week after it. I don't remember the exact time or date or anything. I just remember finally like being able to leave the office at like, you know, 5 or 6 that night. We had delivered our shows, and, you know, we were gonna have more the next day or so, but like the first time to be able to go home and, you know, just get it out. And the worst part really was not being able to even talk to my wife about it, because I was always so busy. She would call me, and she wasn't working because her office was still closed for the first week or two after it. And even all my friends, you know, a lot of whom lived downtown were being displaced. I couldn't even get in contact with them. Cell phones were still not working. I still didn't have any real chance to have a normal, you know, conversation either about how they were doing or even just talk about anything nonsensical. It was, you know, it was all about WTC. It was all about New York. It was all about death and misery and deadlines, and it really, really sucked. You know, it really sucked working that hard. We made great films out of it, and everyone who saw them thought they were amazing and were really happy that we did them because they learned something. But it also came at a real cost, I think, that everybody that worked on them, you know, which is not a chance to really take some time and know that, you know, your life totally changed.
And you said there was one day, about a week after or so, that you got out of work early and you had the chance to just sort of mull it all over. And I mean, what really brought you to a breaking point, was it?
You know, I know what set it off, actually. It was early in the afternoon. I was still here, and I got a call from a friend of mine in California who I hadn't talked to in a few weeks, and she wanted to know how I was doing. And just hearing her voice, it was like the first friend I had talked to. And I mean, I talk to her once every few months. It's not even like I see her that often because she lives so far away. But it was someone I really, am close to in a lot of ways too. And that's what kind of like reminded me that there's all these people out there that I need to be in touch with, and that's what's important to me, And I remember just like having to just getting choked up and teary-eyed, which isn't my normal MO, and I just had to walk out of here. I just needed to take time, and I just left the building. I didn't even tell anybody. I just, just left. And that's just where I had some time to like, it wasn't even mulling it over. I wasn't going to sit there and like think about, the loss to the city or the people. It was more of a maybe really, selfish moment about needing to, I can't even, it's not even tangible. I mean, it's not even rational. It was just exhaustion and sadness and feeling disconnected that really brought it out.
The week's sort of not rational, so it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, and we were disconnected. I mean, the 50 of us or however many were that were sitting here, day and night working on this stuff, we were shut off from the rest of the world. We were sharing something with the world that was amazing, but we were totally shut off from what, we were shut off from the things that normally make us feel, like people, which is other people. And that's what was really bad about it.
And lastly, when I was at Union Square that last Friday, there was that whole big verbal fight. And it was basically between the peace movement, let's not get into war, between really nationalistic feeling. It may not have been a war movement, but could have been taken that way. It was really, flag waving, we're the best in the whole entire world. And then, there was that third element, which was, just disgustingly racist and, really like, let's kill everything that's Islamic and let's just go out and bomb everything. I mean, how did it feel to be in New York at a time like that when it seemed like everyone was taking a side?
I felt like I was in the minority. There were all these people that started, waving the flags the next day, and this is an attack on America, and God bless America. And it actually really bothered me. It bothered me because, one, this is one of the reasons why, they're attacking us, is because we have this pride in country. Yet, I don't really know what it means to be country. I wish we had found a different way to connect with each other than just to, put it all in these stars and stripes. To me, it was more about, why not understand now we really are all the same people, We should all love each other for just the fact that we, have two eyes and, have skin and can talk to each other and can find some common ground, or if we can't, well, we'll, move on. But I don't know how to explain this either in a rational way. It just didn't feel right to me to be in a city or in a country where everyone was waving the flag and taking pride in America, when I felt like we weren't taking pride in ourselves as people interacting with one another. Does that make sense? Maybe. And so that kind of turned me off a little bit. And I kind of kept my mouth shut about it because, I'm not going to sit there and, if this is what's making people feel better, that's great, It wasn't what I needed. I just needed to be able to be with the people I love and respect everyone around me a little bit more and cherish all those people around me a little bit more. But it also really scared the crap out of me that, now we're going to be Muslim bashing, because I know plenty of Muslims. My wife is from Turkey and she's a Turkish Jew, but, a lot of her parents' friends are Muslim and we know a lot of them. And I have a lot of friends who are also, they have no, plans on blowing up Grand Central Station. They have no, they don't look at me and say, Jew, I want you dead. That's not who they are. So that scared the hell out of me. I got really concerned that it was going to be another situation where we were going to be rounding up people, that there was going to be racial profiling all over the city, all over the country. And that would distance friends and good people even more, because the fear was for me that you've got a very, bright, wonderful, great Muslim community in the United States that has no ill will towards us, as a country, or the Jews as a people, and if we push them too far, they're going to have to take sides, and eventually you take sides with the people who will accept you. And if the only people who are going to accept you are the people that are, waging war against us and causing problems, well, that was really scary, because, we all have survival instincts. So what scared me was that I was afraid that we were going to get to this point where we were going to be, had the xenophobic way, and everyone who comes from a Muslim or Arabic background is going to be expelled from the country or detained in some way, and that was really freaky.
And I mean, even the president got behind it at like a sort of point in time.
He did?
He got a little wild west out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a liberal bunch, though. And I said the same thing, but I was definitely in the minority. I mean, even at Union Square, when everyone was like yelling, I mean, this one guy was like, "This is the land of the only true God." And, I mean, it was...
No, we're not the land of the only true God, But look, yeah, I come from a relatively, that New York liberal sensibility, I guess. I try to be compassionate and caring when I can, but I guess that's my mindset, is that I know who I like, I know who I trust, I know there are good people out there, and I just wish that we didn't overgeneralize what, who these people are and what they represent. And that to me was the most frightening aftermath of those days. Aside from worrying and looking over my head at any given moment when we're going to get attacked again, the next scary thing to me was, what are we going to do as a country to the people that are living here now that represent this evil to us? Bush kept saying these evil people. And bad choice of words. Evildoers, I think he said.
We will stop evil. I'm still alive. Anything you want to add that I haven't asked?
I'll say the weirdest thing. I remember like being in college, and this is like, 10, 12 years ago. I remember just like looking up from the campus one day. It was about 12 years ago. It was just at the time of the Gulf War. I was in my senior year when we invaded Iraq. And I remember looking up in the sky and thinking, wow, we'll never ever see like an enemy plane in our airspace. I mean, yeah, there was Pearl Harbor, but that was before we had like, serious radar, I guess, or had the capability to be able to stop those kind of attacks or see them coming. And I really do remember looking up in the sky saying, I'll never have to worry about like, an enemy F-14 about to drop a bomb over our head, because we're so isolated from the rest of the world, from the hostile world. It never even occurred to me that what could happen that day happened on the 11th. And I remember, after the second plane struck, and I knew right away that this was some bad stuff, that's the first thing that came to my mind was that day, in like 1991, looking up in the sky, over Saratoga Springs, and knowing that I would never have to worry about what now I had to worry about. And it wasn't an F-14 that came from, overseas, but it was, just as bad. And that was kind of wild. That's all I have to add.
Room home just for a while. Try to be high direction. So much.
All right. You all good? We're rolling?
We're all.
Okay. Where do I begin? I'll just riff. On Sunday, I went out to Times Square, and I noticed for the first time that entire week that there were American flags everywhere. And I had heard throughout the week that, let's start that again. We can probably just use that bite anyway.
Oh, that's fine.
On Sunday morning, I went over to Times Square and I saw American flags everywhere. They were on buildings, they were on taxis, they were on buildings, they were on taxis, they were hanging off of storefronts, they were on people's shirts. And it also became a business. Everywhere you looked, people were selling flags on bandanas, on pins. And I guess it was all to get in the spirit of, you know, USA, go America, here's something we can all connect to. Let's all find hope in stars and stripes, and this is what binds us. And while it was beautiful in some ways, because the flags did look beautiful blowing in the wind, and it was great to see this unity and this pride, it also was a little scary for me because it made me think about the arrogance that our enemies see in us and why they attacked us, or one of their justifications for attacking us is because of this imposition of America. United we stand, as great as we are. So while there was a lot of beauty in what I saw, it also frightened me a bit because it didn't seem that that's what we should really be focusing on. We shouldn't be focusing on the flag. We should be focusing on who we are as a people, what we have in common, not just with our own countrymen, but with other people around the world. And that's it.
Is New York normally a flag place?
New York has never been particularly a flag place. I mean, you'll see flags at Rockefeller Center. You know, you'll see, I guess, an American flag at the stock exchange or something like that. But in federal buildings, you'll see American flags around New York. But New York City has never been the particularly patriotic or flag-waving city. But after September 11th, that all changed. Because when I walked around Times Square Sunday morning, the only thing I saw everywhere I looked were flags. Flags on buildings, flags on cabs, flags on people's shirts, flags on their heads, flags on their pins, and it became a business. It wasn't just proud to be an American, it was, and it became a business. I mean, people were selling flags on every corner, in every shape, every form you could think of. Stars and stripes were all over the city, and they were all over in a city which historically has never been the most patriotic place on earth. And while there was a lot of beauty in it, also